back one and all. We're working on our Unity tutorial. We have our pickup objects. It's time to add some score. Now, we downloaded some assets that we're going to use to sort of kickstart our scoring mechanics. We're going to add a scoring mechanic, and we're going to do a little forward thinking and try to make sure that our scoring persists from scene to scene to scene. So in order to do that, this assumes that you've done all the tutorials up to here, that you have a player, you have a pickup object and a mechanic that when you jump through you collide with the objects, they disappear. So what we want to do is add scoring. Now, in order to do this, we're going to do sort of a fast forward sort of move here. On our provided that you downloaded earlier, there is a prefab basically called GM, and it stands for GameManager. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag it from provided and put it into our prefabs. We're just going to drag it right up there. And we go into the prefabs and we take a look at it. It's composed of a couple objects here. If you click on this little plus thing, you're going to see that this Game Manager has built into it an HUD, stands for Heads Up Display. And we're going to add it to our game. And when we add it to our game, suddenly you're going to see score over here, and there's this notice text. Let's run it, and then we'll talk about what's here, and we'll edit it so that when we collide with our objects, we get a score. So we're going to go ahead and try it out and see if it works. I want you to pay attention to the playing window over here. Notice it says score 0. And at this point, there's no change to our score, but we do have the heads up display. So now what we want to do is work on configuring this. Let's take a look at the script that goes with the Game Manager. So we're going to work on this a little bit. A couple things we should probably point out, then this is built into the script. I highly recommend, if you haven't followed along, that you get all of the code for this. I'm not going to post this. This comes from a tutorial. It had a link. It was public. If you click on here, Game Manager script, you'll see a couple things: UI score, UI center. You'll see score text, notice text, menu level, victory level. You click on levels, you have the size element. So there's some pieces here that we're going to probably tap into on a later date. At this point, what we want to do is let's look at this code just long enough to figure out what's going on here, and I'm going to zoom in on my code. The first thing I want you to point out is we have a couple classes here. We have one class called Persist GM and one called Game Manager. The Persist GM is its own sort of object. It's a class, and notice it says it's a class with static members. So this is sort of separate from our Game Manager. It has a static public property called score. And technically, it's just a variable. We set the score to 0. That begins our game with the score of 0. And if you open up the Game Manager, what you're going to notice is an onDestroy method and a start method. And we have a couple of to-do items. So this is what we are going to try to do. First of all, we're going to try to make it when we collide with a pickup, we get a score. Then we're going to make sure that when this Game Manager is destroyed, we store the score. Now, what do I mean by destroying the manager? I think it helps for you to understand sort of the game state of what's going on. We have one scene in our game so far. Obviously, you're going to want to expand your game. Maybe if you get to a certain level, you go to a new level that has new items and new things to discover, new traps, new whatever it may be. Okay, so in that case, you would want to have another scene. And here's the thing, the Game Manager, you're going to want to create different scenes. You're going to want to put that Game Manager in different scenes. But if we leave this scene, it's going to destroy the Game Manager. So we need a way of sort of preserving it and copying it. And that's what this is about. onDestroy is going to be when we switch scenes. We want to make sure we can that score will persist. And then when we start, we're going to grab from the Persist GM, Persistent Game Manager, we're going to grab the score. Okay, but before we do it, we need a way of editing our score. So we're going to go to our PlayerController. Okay, so in our PlayerController, we're going to add one particular variable, and we're going to give it a actually, what is it? Oh, the game manager. We need to refer to the game manager. And we're going to make it public. And let me check my code to make sure I've got everything set up right. So in our game manager, we're just going to call it GM. It's going to be public, and it's a game manager, which is actually built into the Unity engine. So that's a data type, little g, little m, GM for game manager. Okay, so now right here, we need to, there's a potential fix that we're going to need to do. And if we click on here, it's going to tell us there's some things related to this that we're going to do. Let's just not worry about that yet. Okay. We're going to go down and we're going to have it on our trigger enter. So this happens when we collide with and we trigger a trigger. A trigger is triggered. I don't know if that makes sense. But we have this if we collide basically with the pickup tag. Okay, that's the pickup object. This is when we want to get our score. So not only do we want to destroy that game object, but we want to add to our score. Since we're going to do two things of code after this if statement, we're going to have to move this into curly brackets. Okay, so this is one thing that will happen. So I'm going to cut that, paste it in there. The other thing we're going to have is check this out, GM dot, and is it score? Yep, GM score, GM dot score. If we do plus plus, that's called the incrementer. And this works on an integer, and it just adds 1 to the score. So let's take a look at the game manager and see if we can find score. So there's a little thing here. We're going to learn a little bit about some object-oriented using a C# paradigm. In C#, a lot of times what you do is create a private variable like int score. And in C#, it's very common to put an underscore here. And what we do about this is that we make it private, and then we create what's called a property. This is a property. And this property of score, notice there's no underscore. I know it kind of sounds funny, a score with no underscore. And we're going to make it get allows us to read the variable. Set allows us to change the variable. Okay. So this get return score means we can now say gm.score equals, and we can read it. Not equals, but we can like find out what the score happens to be. And you're going to use that in a bit. Okay, so don't worry about it. We're going to get there. And then we have a set. And in set, what it does is in set, it means we want to change it. Okay, so when we say score equals and we give it a value, we do the score plus plus. In fact, that's exactly what this is going to happen. This gm.score plus plus is triggering the set part of the property. And what we do is whatever the value we set it to, in other words, we're going to add 1. We're going to also change the private variable in here. But then we're going to run this thing called update score UI, which is built into this, which I'm going to have to scroll down, update score UI, and now we're using the user interface element. That's that thing we saw on the screen. So it says score and score.toString, which means take the variable, which is an integer, and represent it as a string so that we can now display the actual score on the score. So every time we change the score, we want to update it on the UI element. We make our own method to do that. Now, I didn't code it. This was part of it, but I just wanted you to see. On start, we're going to update that score also. And then there's this clear notice UI. I'm not sure how the clear notice is being used. We'll take that into account in a bit. But on PlayerController, just I wanted to point out, we have to access the game manager, little g, little m, and then we're going to add to the score over here. Now, game manager, we still haven't configured this. First of all, let's save our changes so we get this in here. Let's go back to Unity, and I want to click on the GM. Actually, no, I want to click on the player. When I click on the player and we look at the script, you're going to notice now that public variable GM is down here and it says none. Okay, so here's the thing is we need to tell it, which game manager are we referring to? We are referring to this game manager. So I just drag it over and I drop it in, game manager. Okay, so now that we drag this over, I'm going to control save and let's test it. So the score should get updated every time we collide with an object. And as you see here, my score is already 2 because I've collided with 2 objects. It is now worth 3. Okay. All right, so that works. This is a good time to commit our changes. As you may recall, I'm using source tree. We talked about that in one of my videos. Right away, it says there's some uncommitted changes. So we've changed the player controller. We've got a bunch of other things on here. So we're just going to stage it all. So we click stage all, we put it all in here, and now we want to commit these changes. So I want to click on commit over here, and I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to just say adding GameManager and scoring mechanic. And now I'm going to click commit. Now I could push those changes if I wanted to. That probably would have been a good idea. It's too late now, I didn't check it. So at this point I can push it, and I'm working, I don't even know what brand, I'm on development, so I'm just going to check on development, I'm going to push it through. All right, so that pushes it through. Let's go back here because there's a little bit more work we need to do before we're done. So I said we're going to do some forward thinking. So our forward thinking is basically when we start the game, we want to grab what the score is from the persist GM. But when it gets destroyed, we're also going to want to do that. On persist GM, we've already set the static public int score to 0. Okay. And then on here, on start, we want to basically grab that score from persist JM. Now, right now, this is set to 0, and this is set to score. This score is set to 0. So it's hard to tell what's happening, what score are we representing. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a score of 300 on persist. I'm going to save our changes. Now, there shouldn't be any changes when we run it just yet because it shouldn't be pulling from the persist. So it should begin with a score of 0 when we run it. And if it does, that means that's good. So here's 0. Okay, so notice we set score up here to 300, but when we play it, it's 0. So watch what we're going to do. On start, what we want to do is we're going to restore the GameManager score from persist. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our score, which was created. This is the score that's part of the GameManager, but we're going to set it to persist GM dot score. Oops, I didn't get that highlighted. Persist GM dot score. Now we're going to save our changes and see what score we begin with. Now it should set it to 300 when we play. So this would be like the same as moving on to another scene where we're persisting our score, and there it is, 300. Okay, so now we know we're able to pull from the persist. So we've done that. So we're just going to, basically, I'm going to get rid of the to-do and just leave this comment that says restore the game manager score from persist GM. And let's try this. Now this is going to be the opposite. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set the persist GM score to be equal to our current score. And that's the score of the game manager score. So basically, now when this is destroyed, our persist GM will get a new score. Well, we can't fully test this out, but at this point, that should work at 400. And we don't have any other scenes, so at this point, I think we're good to go. So the last thing I want to do before I leave is reset that score, first of all. It should begin at 0 because the beginning of the game, you should start with nothing and get score as you go. Let me give you one other option you may want to do, and this is totally up to you. Right now, we're just adding 1 to the score for colliding with a pickup object. Maybe you think the pickup object is worth more than that. What you could do is you could put plus equals, and we could put, say, 25. So what we're going to say is every time we collide with an object, we get 25 points. Okay, so it doesn't have to be gm.score++. It can be something else. Or we can even create a variable that sets it. At this point, let's just go ahead and try it out. We should begin with 0, and when we collide, we should get 25, then 50, etc., etc., etc. And it's working. Okay, so we have that now. If you like the scoring where that's at, just leave it like it is, or go back to the score ++. Your choice. I'm leaving it here. I think this is good to go. I'm going to go ahead and close this. The other thing is whenever you do any git pushes, pulls, commits, don't have this thing running. It's always best not to. So I'm just going to go ahead and close the whole thing down. I'm going to go over here, and at this point I have some unstaged files. I'm in the commit window now, so I'm just going to click stage all, and I'm just going to add adding a persistent score to our persist gem. And I'm going to check this push changes immediately to origin development. I click commit. Now it's going to push those. Notice how much easier that was. I didn't have to type out the git add dot, the git commit message. Well, I actually did type it out. But now we're pushing it through as we go. And if I were to go on the online repo, I should see on development that all those changes have worked. All right, well, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos. In our next tutorial, we're going to start making our game a lot more interesting by having a live box where when basically the camera's going to start moving. We're going to have to keep up with it. If we go outside of it, we're going to die. The game is going to end. So stay tuned for that. I think you'll enjoy it.